DeWitt has an MBA from Harvard. He joined the Cardinals in '96. He became president in 2008. Most recently, he has overseen the design, development, and opening of Ballpark Village. And if you've not yet visited this, then give yourself a treat and go soon. It is impressive. So let's welcome Bill DeWitt III, president of our National League champions, the St. Louis Cardinals. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Kevin. Welcome. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Kevin. I guess I'll start with a little PowerPoint. I had a little fun yesterday before the game, grabbing some logos off the internet and pulling some pictures down that I had scanned not too long ago. And just wanted to lay out a little bit about my family's history in baseball, because I get a lot of questions about that when I'm out and about, and just kind of fun to tell the story, because it goes way back. And then get into a little bit about how the Cardinals are operated from a family business standpoint. So the first thing is the slideshow. Let's see, first slide, here we go. So my grandfather, Bill DeWitt Sr., started out, and he was from here, grew up in St. Louis, was a 14-year-old. His father was a butcher in North St. Louis, and somehow he was selling soda at the ballpark. And somehow he befriended Branch Rickey, who was in the front office at that time as general manager. Well, they didn't even call it general manager back then. He was the baseball man, okay? And he was his runner and office boy and did a bunch of other things. And then Rickey took a liking to him and told him he should continue his education. He ended up going to law school at SLU at night while he was still working with the Cardinals, and ultimately became the treasurer, which was his highest post with the Cardinals. But he was there for quite a while, just some old logos and things, fun stuff. Those are pictures of him probably during that era when he was with the Cardinals. This is a fun little thing that we have at home, which is a picture of when they won the World Series in 1934. They did this in 31 too, but in 34, Old Judge Coffee, which was a local brand, I guess, put out a poster celebrating the World Championship team, and the entire front office was on the picture as well. You can see the gas house gang, the players and stuff, but in the middle are is the manager. My grandfather was the treasurer. Branch Rickey was the secretary, or I don't know, what does it say there, general manager, and the owner and the secretary. So that was the entire front office in 1934. They had a secretary, and then everybody else was seasonal. Today we have just under 200 full-time employees, and that doesn't even count, scouts and coaches and so forth down through the minor league system. So things have changed in 100 years. But the birds on the bat remain. So after his stint with the Cardinals, he moved over to the Browns, and so from 37 to 53, he was the general manager because he had learned the baseball side of it with the Cardinals. And Rickey had, as you probably all know, invented the farm system. So a lot of the things he did with the Cardinals was to really learn how Rickey's strategy was working. And so his focus with the Browns was on building a farm system similar to what the Cardinals had done. Of course, they didn't have any money, and they were always struggling. And part of the farm system approach was Rickey had sold his interest in the stadium in order to fund the purchase of these minor league teams that he was developing. The Browns didn't really have the resources to do that. So what he ended up doing, my grandfather, is, essentially having to trade the better players to the bigger markets for cash. And so that was how they kind of survived in the American League at that time. But when the war came, all bets were off. It changed the dynamic of the operating environment for the team. And he was able to, because all the great players were off fighting in the war. But he was able, but they kept baseball going. It was part of the initiative that even the president got involved and said we got to have baseball to keep people entertained at home. So anyway, he was able to win the Browns' only pennant in 1944 as their general manager, was executive of the year, and ultimately ended up selling. He actually bought the club on a loan, mostly with a loan from the other owners of the American League. Branch Rickey, I think, was influential in convincing the other owners that, hey, this kid is running the Browns. He's the right guy for the job. And so imagine today buying a baseball team just basically with no money down, but a loan from the other owners of the league. So he did that, and he was owner for several years, and then ultimately had to sell to his good friend Bill Veeck, who we'll get to in a second. But this picture is fun. It's hanging up in my office. It's a picture of my grandfather and grandmother. I think it's the '48 All-Star game in St. Louis when the Browns hosted, and I love it because there's so many things different about it, of just people sitting in the stands, what they were wearing, the hats, the ladies had all this, stuff that they're wearing. The bats are right out there. You could just reach over and grab a bat if you were in the front row. The larger expanded picture, you can see somebody's briefcase down below the flag, just random. You would just never see that today. And so just a few photos that I pulled that are kind of indicative of his career with the Browns. Upper right is a meeting he had with Branch Rickey after they had parted ways, and Rickey had gone to Brooklyn, of course, and famously signed Jackie Robinson to his first major league contract. And then on the upper left looks like a league meeting with Judge Landis, the first commissioner, who was old at that time, but had obviously been very influential in the game. And then the picture on the bottom is just a meeting with Bill Veeck. So Bill Veeck was the ultimate showman, and he bought the club from my grandfather. They were lifelong friends. When the Browns had to sell financially. But he kept on my grandfather as general manager. And during that time, Veeck was doing everything he could to get butts in the seats for the Browns, because the Cardinals were, always a little better at getting people in the seats, and they had better teams. So what did he do? He hires a midget to take an at bat, Eddie Goodell, and this was a classic Bill Veeck move. He it was between doubleheaders one game, and he has this giant cake wheeled in there. There's Martians running around. Goodell pops out of the cake. He's 3 foot tall, and he comes out in uniform, and his uniform was the only thing that Bill Veeck had sort of messed up on, because he had gotten a contract for Goodell. He had gotten it sort of cleared without really telling them what he was up to, but the league and the umpires knew this new player was making his major league debut. And he'd gotten a bat, a little toy, those small little wood bats, and he told Goodell, do not swing. He was afraid. That was his biggest fear, that Eddie would swing and ruin the stunt, because the idea was obviously he'd get on a deep crouch like Pete Rose, before Pete Rose even existed, and create a strike zone about this big that would be impossible. And sure enough, he walked on 4 pitches. But the point was that he didn't have a uniform for him. He'd forgotten that, oh shoot, I got to get one that's smaller. So it turns out that my grandfather, who had always liked to order, he ordered the jerseys, which again today things are a little different. But as general manager, he did everything. He ordered the jerseys, and he ordered a few extra smalls for my father and his 2 sisters, Dee Dee and Joan, just for fun. So they'd have them, they could go take batting practice, or my father was the bat boy. And anyway, so he said, Billy, I need your jersey. And because, I'm doing this thing with Eddie Goodell. So anyway, he gives up his jersey. They take off the jersey. They take off his number 6 and put 1/8 on it. And there's Eddie Goodell in the uniform. And that uniform now is in the Cardinals Hall of Fame in our museum here at Ballpark Village, which is really a fun, full circle moment for us to be able to do that. So that was the midget story. And then, so that was in the in '53. The Browns, of course, were sold to Baltimore, and they moved. And my grandfather was still general manager. He stayed a year on in Baltimore. I kind of just commuted from St. Louis. And then he was without a team, so he ended up doing a few more things in baseball. He was assistant general manager of the Yankees under George Weiss. They told him, come on in and you'll be the next general manager of the Yankees in a couple of years when Weiss retires. Well, Weiss didn't retire for another like 25 years or something. So he moved on when he saw the writing on the wall there. Then he did some work for Major League Baseball. He did a project to coordinate the minor league teams, and obviously with his experience in the 30s with the formation of the whole minor league system under Branch Rickey, he was well suited to that job. And then in the late 50s, he was with the Tigers. My Aunt Joan is still in Detroit as a result of that move. He was the general manager and made some interesting, good moves that set them up for a good run following that. And then his big move was to move to Cincinnati, and he became the sole owner. And that's when he had finally made a few bucks in the game, and he was able to put everything on the line and buy the entire team at that time. And won a pennant right away in 1961 after a number of trades. He had one bad trade in Cincinnati. He traded Frank Robinson for Milt Pappas, and Robinson went on to win the Triple Crown with Baltimore and helped them win the World Series. So I think that haunted him for a while. But and it's a little bit of a shame because he did so many things, with the Cardinals. I mean, they won multiple pennants in World Series, and the Reds, and he was the only general manager to win a pennant in both leagues by this time. So, but anyway. So he was with the Reds through the 60s, and then ultimately sold in the late 60s when he didn't like the idea of a downtown ballpark that was to be shared with the Bengals. He just didn't think that would fly. He thought that you should have their own stadium. I guess that was about 40 years ahead of his time on that one. But so his final stint in baseball was as part owner of the White Sox with his old friend Bill Veeck. And I do remember going and visiting as a little kid up there in the old Comiskey Park and seeing Bill Veeck. He was very intimidating. He had a wooden leg, and rather than kind of hide it, he flaunted it. I mean, it was like he had this ashtray in the wooden leg that would open, and he'd be smoking a cigar, and he'd put it out in there, and he was just a one of a kind. I remember kind of physically being, kind of manhandled by him, like Billy, like just one of those guys you just don't forget. He had a cane and all these baseball carvings in it. Just a real character. And those teams had these goofy shorts, the White Sox. I mean, he tried all kinds of things. There was Disco Demolition Night, all this crazy stuff. But my grandfather was the straight man in that partnership. He was at that time, sort of the league representative for the White Sox. And then after having had his whole life in baseball, I think the thing that he really liked was the fact that he was on the Veterans Committee in Cooperstown and also a member of the MLB Executive Council at that time. And then he passed in '82. So that was his career. There's just some fun stuff that I pulled. We have this charm bracelet at home. I guess for over the years, my grandfather would collect charms and give them to her. So the charm bracelet showing all those team affiliations was something that my grandmother had, and it's a fun heirloom to have. But a lot of teams and a lot of experience with Major League Baseball. When you see all those logos, it's pretty amazing how much experience he had in the game. So my father then, I'll talk about his career. So he thought in college that he was going to be the next owner of the Reds. He thought it would transition through the family. And so when my grandfather sold it in the late 60s, I think he was probably a little bit, bummed out. But he did work there, and he learned a lot about the business at that time in the mid 60s. He was full-time for several years. So when they sold, though, both of my parents who grew up in St. Louis, they did move to Cincinnati when the Reds thing happened. And then after selling the Reds, they just stayed in town and raised our family. So that's why my hometown is Cincinnati. He was always loved sports, and he wanted to stay involved, so he was an initial shareholder when Paul Brown came to town and then founded the Bengals. We were joking yesterday because I flipped through this with him, and he said, God, I wish I had kept that share. I guess it was just a single share at that time. I don't know what percentage it was, but I'm sure that'd be worth a lot today. And this is a key point, he started Reynolds DeWitt investment firm. I saw Jim Cooper's thing, and it's not unlike Thompson Street or something like that, where it was a partnership with Mercer Reynolds. And they just did a deal-by-deal private equity LBOs for 25 years. And I think that's really something that, because my grandfather, despite even having owned a team himself and sold the Reds, made some money during that sale, but wasn't fabulously wealthy. I think the sale price at that time was $6 million or something like that. He had borrowed a bunch of money to make the purchase. So certainly for him, and by all standards, that's a big number. But in the context of the modern sports economy, it wasn't like we have today. So my father figured he'd better do something, and so he started this investment firm, and they did a number of different deals, and really, when we add it all up, it was probably in the hundreds of deals that they came in and out of over time, and a active shareholder, board member type of approach. So, that was the key, because I think that gave him both the baseball and the business experience when the time was right for him to get back into baseball. And one of the reasons why I'm a big, passionate hockey fan is because also in the mid-'70s, he helped bring the WHA Cincinnati Stingers to town. The NHL promised that with all these expansion WHA teams that they'd be able to merge in, and that didn't end up proving out. A few teams merged when the WHA merged into the NHL, but the Stingers ended up folding for lack of significant fan support. And then the next opportunity my father had in sports was with the Texas Rangers. He heard that the team was for sale, and he kicked the tires out there, and he was contemplating becoming the key owner and the main decision maker. And then I think my mom didn't want to move to Texas was the real reason, but I haven't really pinned her down on that one. But ultimately, he decided to just be a limited partner and helped round up the investment group. The main guy he called was George Bush, and he got him involved. And George said, "Sure, I'd love to be involved." And the rest literally is history, as it relates to Bush's career. And I always laugh and kind of wonder, what if he had not called his friend George Bush? What would things be different in a whole myriad of ways? I think probably they would be. But they had done some oil and gas deals back in the 80s, early 80s and late 70s, early 80s together. And they had traveled the country to pitch oil and gas limited partnerships. Kind of funny. And then he thought he wanted to be the key decision maker for a baseball team. That was his dream. And so he had an opportunity to do that with Baltimore. And I was actually living in Washington, D.C. at the time after college. And he loved the Rangers, but they were in a good spot with their management. So he negotiated with Eli Jacobs, who was the current owner, and was being forced to sell because of some things he had over-guaranteed on his other businesses. The Orioles were thriving. They had just built Camden Yards. They were the hot team. And so my father was negotiating with him. He liked my father, liked his baseball experience, one of the best for the Orioles. But at the last minute, the Orioles were thrown into bankruptcy court because the creditors for the Jacobs empire didn't like the relationship aspects of the business side of things. And then on the other side of it is, one other point is the 3 minor league teams that we own would also report under me from a business standpoint. The other side of the business really is on the baseball side. And John Mozeliak, our general manager, does a great job of running that. And really, I think the way that those two departments relate to one another is a critical piece in the success of a sports team, because they can feel like two different, separate things. In some respects, they are. And I like to think of them as two different warped economies. You've got the baseball economy, and the payrolls are through the roof relative to the average person. But then the front office and the folks that work there, we have to operate under the real world scenario of coming to work 9 to 5 or more. So making sure that all works together and getting people to understand what's different about it really creates, I think, the buy-in from a front office standpoint. And we have such a great seasoned veteran staff. A lot of turnover and youth at the lower levels, but a lot of seasoned management at the vice president and director level that's been very helpful to me as I've grown up through the organization and been able to rely on that great experience. But when I said that ours is a little bit unique, and the luxury of it is really my father's active involvement, because a lot of teams have significantly more senior management than we have. They might have a senior VP of business operations, chief operating officers. There's, in some cases, president of baseball operations in addition to the general manager. There might be all kinds of different structures that have multiple people at the top. In our case, we've got, I think, a real efficient structure, because my father can do both. So he literally deals with John Mozeliak every day on the baseball side. He understands that he could be a GM if he wanted to, but he also wants to oversee a little bit on the business side. And so his ability to be kind of 90% of his time and having that skill set, I think, allows us to be efficient and nimble as it relates to both aspects of the business, the baseball side and the business side. The other aspect I'll talk about is my family in particular. So there's 4 kids in my family. I have an older sister, Katie Kern, who is in San Francisco, raising her family there. I have a younger brother, Andrew DeWitt, raising his family in Cincinnati. And Andrew how many of you all have been to Dewey's Pizza here in St. Louis? Pretty good percentage of you. Dewey's Pizza is his baby. He founded and owns and operates Dewey's Pizza. So we've about 5 or 6 here in St. Louis, and a number of them in Cincinnati, and a few others in Ohio. So that's his business, and he'll weigh in on Cardinal topics from time to time, particularly if we blow a save or something of that nature, like we did last night. No, but no, he's great and pretty mellow about it. But he has some great opinions as it relates to some projects, and helped me with Ballpark Village and the retail entertainment aspect of it and things like that. So meaning my father and I, pull from family members as needed. I have a younger sister, Margot Good, who's also in Cincinnati, spent some time here, but her husband, Dan, has been doing some special projects for us, and is now actually going to be kind of a primary liaison for us on these minor league teams that we own, one of which we purchased just recently, which is the Memphis Club. And so I felt we needed a little bit more bench strength as it relates to these minor league teams that we're owning and controlling. And so Dan's going to help us there. He has been in the money management investment business for a number of years, but a huge sports fan, and it has a great deep knowledge of the game. So I'm excited about that. And in terms of, how the family decides things, we haven't had a lot of, based on what I just described with our immediate family, there isn't a ton of family members that are clamoring for the same position or what have you. So I think we're fortunate that way in terms of just how the cookie crumbled with our family. But we do have a family partnership as it relates to the Cardinals investment. And the DeWitt investment is a family investment. Obviously, my father and then the 4 kids each are part of that. And that entity has an operating agreement and spells out the various things that needed to be decided if, for whatever reason, something happens to my father. So, we kind of pulled that all together several years ago because it was a little bit just, everybody had their ownership piece, and that was that. And we realized, as we have to start planning, as all you all know, we put a little bit more structure into it, and we've never really even had to start making any decisions because, my father's still at the helm and still very active. So that's kind of how the family sets up, and there's every intention to keep it going into the, call it G2, which would be myself and my siblings. As for Generation 3, jury's out. We haven't really decided whether that's a goal of the family. I think it would be nice, but who knows? That's a long way away. And there's 12 grandchildren scattered around those various cities, and so we'll see. But maybe that's probably a good jumping off point for Q&A if you guys want to take a few.